The following video is a collaboration that I did with another YouTube creator named Homath. We've become friends over the last several months. His channel is about 750,000 subs, and he goes over developmental psychology in the dating world. And in this 2-hour video, we are going to go over everything from attraction and the brain chemicals that are kind of popping around that make all that happen, gut feelings, what they are, how they show up, and what's actually happening in your body when you think you found a soulmate. Hypnotism, who can be hypnotized, who cannot. We're going to go over that, as well as brainwashing. How can you brainwash someone? How can you brainwash yourself? Then step by step over how to split a personality. And then we're going to go into how the government uses psychological operations, also called PSYOPs, to manipulate you as well as to distract you when other things are happening. And we're going to end with a step-by-step guide with how the government literally can manipulate an entire nation. So if you're ready, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Homath.
All right, I've got something different for you today. A lot of my fans reach out to me and they want to talk to me about various topics. They have ideas for videos. Usually, I don't have the time for that, but this one was so interesting and so aligned with where I'm going with my content that I thought I would take the time out to do it. We're going to be talking today about attraction and how it works, and how this friend of mine, BK, who you'll meet in a moment, saw my content and learned about it and decided that my audience, you guys, would be a good place to talk about what he does, which is using the same principles that I talk about to control and manipulate people's minds, and how that might be happening to you. So here is BK, and he's going to tell you what he does.
I just want to tell you that I thank you for having me on. I've gotten to meet Mr. Homath over the last couple months. We spent some time online together, but what we're talking about today is, for the most part, I want to talk to you about what's happening inside your brain, because I want to show you how brainwashing works, how mind control works, how to split someone's personality. There's so many different things that we can go into today, but people ask all the time about hypnotism. They ask all the time about coercion and persuasion. That's part of what I do for a living. For 5 years, I was trained with the FBI, and for the last multitude of years, I'm actually part of what's called the InfraGard program with the FBI. So we do a lot of forensic analysis and body language and things like that. And I wanted to kind of show Mr. Math here, once I found out what his channel was like, how many of the same principles that are used for attraction and many of the same principles that drive people to seek each other out are the precisely same principles and the precisely same neuronal activity between your ears that actually are what drives psychological operations, brainwashing, and all the rest. It's exactly the same principle. So that's where I came up with maybe throwing this out to Mr. Math to see if this was something he was interested in.
Yeah. And what struck me about it was, one of the things that people say to me very often is, when they watch my content, they'll say, I've known this for a long time. I just didn't know how to say it. People will say that they see my drawings like this one, and they'll say, okay, so I know this feeling, I know this part of the relationship, but this helps me put it into words and realize that it's something that everyone else goes through. I think that what we're going to be able to do today is take what BK does and apply this to it, so you guys can understand the world of communication that you live in a little bit differently.
It'll be interesting because so many people don't realize it's all the same components and it all works basically the same. So did you want to kick it off with attraction?
Yeah, I'll just kick it off with what I do. I focus on showing people what's going on beneath their conscious perception. I draw these charts, like I said, to show people what they are thinking and feeling that they might not know about, what women are thinking and feeling that they definitely don't know about, like how when you ask women what they want in a guy, they only talk about this stuff, and they are assuming that the guy is going to be attractive already anyway. And this creates a really big communication rift between the sexes, where these guys will do these things and then say, what, I did them, why don't you like me? Well, it's because you didn't do these things. So in the same way that when I make content, it helps people understand the difference between what people are consciously thinking about and what they're subconsciously thinking about, That is what we're going to be showing you today in the context of coming from maybe media or education or the government or something like that. So it's basically it's very similar to the way that I make the unconscious conscious, but we're taking it from just attraction and dating into kind of politics, I think. Would that be a good way to put it?
It certainly can be, because many folks that are politicians are constantly using persuasion methods, and they're constantly using the things that we would call manipulation tactics or coercion, or just basic, I know it's a funny word, but brainwashing. It's not difficult to do, and again, we'll show you all the components of that, but they use it all the time, and they're trained in this by vocal coaches and things like this to make sure that they understand how to not only maybe control a room, but to control a narrative. If you've ever heard that term before, controlling a narrative, you'll understand that tonight.
Yes, that's a very important thing that I'm actually going to get into at some point. I'm planning on talking about the difference between facts and narratives, and people don't understand that, and it's a really big issue. People will say, this story is a fact, and no, it's not. It's a bunch of facts that you're making meaning out of, and you don't know the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can we go over what's your history before we get started?
Well, okay. Well, let me back up just a little bit.
Sure.
I was originally in the field of banking operations. And in banking operations, I oversaw 14 lines of business. And part of that was I was a person that was put in charge of the information security as well as the physical security departments in two large West Coast chains of banks. So many branches. And so my job at the time was to go down to the FBI headquarters in the city that I was living in at the time. And we would go weekly for training, and we had to learn how to deal with bank robbery, with kidnapping, with abduction, with coercion, everything from passing notes to grabbing people to rushing the vault. We had to know what to do, what to look for, and all the sort of body language cues that go with that. But that's where I started to kind of sink my teeth into this before I pursued basically my graduate degree, my master's degree in behavioral psychology, because this is just part of the process of understanding when you're doing forensic analysis of a videotape of someone coming in and taking over a bank. You look for what were the pieces that we didn't see this coming, and all that kind of leans into body language and things like that. So that's kind of how it started. And so for 5 years, I was every week at the FBI headquarters in the city where I was at. And I was training and learning about not only the information security part, which is how you keep your electronic banking and all of your information secure and safe, but more than that, primarily was called physical security, which is, again, taking care of, at this point, over 80 branches, because it's two different banks. And that is where it kind of all began. And I picked up my degree in psychology a little bit after that. And so I started teaching some of the things that I was learning, and I found out it's actually pretty lucrative. So I actually do multiple things, but where my bread and butter is I do corporate trainings, I do security trainings. I teach people right now. I teach law enforcement, I teach banking people, I teach security companies, and in different organizations that bring me in, how to read body language, how to do forensic analysis, how to, for the most part, how the brainwashing piece works, how when you're managing people, sometimes they want to know what kind of a person this is. How do I know if this is a narcissist and I don't want to put them on payroll? How do I know if this is possibly someone with psychopathic tendencies? I teach what to look for in all those things. And in the meantime, I'm part of what's called the InfraGard program with the FBI still. And that's part of what I'm continuing to do.
Cool. That sounds like a pretty intense field. And so you would say basically that you have the skills to understand what people are thinking and what kind of people they are by observing things that most people miss.
Yeah, and it starts with being able to read people, but at some point you got to go a little bit deeper if you want to know what's happening inside the brain to make that happen. And that's what kind of my bailiwick is. So when it comes to cognitive neuroscience, that's something I've been studying for the last 7 years. And so what's interesting about that is you're able to put everything from people's tendencies, whether or not they exhibit psychopathic tendencies, whether or not they exhibit dangerous or narcissistic tendencies, and then put that into context of understanding why they do that. And this way you can read people not only from, I can show you how to walk into a room and assess who can be controlled, manipulated, brainwashed, or even talked into something they would never do in less than 35 minutes. I can show you how to do that, because when you understand how the neurons in the brain work and you understand how all the pieces work together, you know how to get in deeper with the person themselves, compel them to believe that they need to do a certain thing or act a certain way. Yeah. So that's all part of that process when you go deeper into cognitive neuroscience.
So basically, what I talk about in my content is how we're all kind of familiar with this. This is how our society used to be structured. We had rules that made people, get married and have families and stick with someone on their own level. And when you get rid of all that, then everybody wants to be with the most attractive partner. And the guys will have short relationships with less attractive women, but won't marry them. And nobody will have relationships with the less attractive men. And this leads to everybody being very unhappy because these guys they've got dozens of women each, and these guys have nothing. And these girls are getting only negative attention from guys they don't want to talk to in the first place. And so people are now, a large chunk of women on the bottom and probably more than half of men are looking for ways to move themselves up this ladder. This is one of the reasons that people come to my content. And the biggest mistake that I ever see people make is, as I said, believing that it's just a set of instructions that you can read and apply, and then they'll work for you. Like you can put on a certain hat or certain clothing or say certain words, and then people will like you. But really, in the same way that you see women and you can tell right away if you might ever like her or not, or if you're attracted to her or not, most of the work that you have to do is in what I'm referring to as self-maximizing, which is, figuring out what you want, working on your mind, knowing what you have to do and where you have to do it, and then assessing your situation. This is a whole, app I'm working on. And how that works is that you are cultivating these characteristics in yourself. And the biggest thing that guys on the bottom of the ladder miss is that they don't have these things, or at least not nearly enough of them. And they do these things and don't get the result. And it's like, well, what are you doing that makes women feel attracted to you? Because if you can do that, you don't have to do as many of these things, and you don't have to do as many of the tricks. And if you do any of the tricks, they'll work right away. If you can make a girl feel like that, then any of the tricks that were not working for you before suddenly will overwhelmingly have results.
One of the things that I love about that is that you're getting deeper than the head. You're getting deeper than what the desire is. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the piece that I wanted to sort of go over. I want to give you kind of an example. And the way that it works is when you're looking for someone, if you can imagine what it is, just take for just a second and think about who it is or the type of person that you're attracted to. And I want you to get that picture in your brain for just a minute. What is it about the opposite sex that draws you to them and makes you attracted to them? Because we know, as you were just saying, that many times the 3s and 4s and 5s that are ladies are shooting for the 8s, 9s, and 10s that are men. So they have a very specific sort of archetype in mind. So that's what I would say is, for your audience, ask yourself, what is it that you're attracted to? Think about that perfect person. And here's what's actually happening. Now, you got to think for just a second. I'm going to go into a little bit of neurology here, but I'll make it very simple. I'm going to break down your brain into 3 pieces. There are many more than that. But if you take your brainstem and your cerebellum, which sits on the back side of your head, that's what many times is referred to as the dinosaur or reptilian brain. And then if you go up above that, between your ears, you have what's called the limbic system. This is all of your emotions. It's also called the mammalian brain. And then if you go on top of that, the third piece is the wrinkly part that everyone is familiar with when you see a brain. And that is called the neocortex, or sometimes called the human brain. Yeah. Now, the reason why this is important is that everything that you are talking about with self-maximize and with levels and all this stuff is sort of inside what we call the limbic system. It's part of the reticular activating system as well as the nucleus accumbens. And the way that works is this. If you can imagine this scenario, Mr. Homath is going to get a new car. So he does all this research and he settles on some kind of a car or a truck or whatever. And he's done all the research. He's looked at all the stuff online. He's looked at brochures. He knows everything about it, what it looks like, everything. So he goes and he buys this vehicle. And then all of a sudden the next day, out of nowhere, Mr. Homath notices, holy cow, there are a bunch of this vehicle on the road. I'd never noticed that before. Yeah. But all of a sudden you start seeing that vehicle everywhere. Now, did everyone go out the night before and buy the same vehicle as you? Of course not. Right. What you've done is you've trained your limbic system to say, this is important to Mr. Homath. So what happens is the reticular activating system inside your brainstem looks and says, okay, he is constantly giving us this influx of the images of this vehicle. Now, remember, your brain, when you go to the limbic system and lower, it doesn't understand language. It only understands emotion and visual cues. So every time you look at that vehicle, every single time you're driving the importance of that vehicle into what's called the reticular activating system. And what it does is it remembers this is super important to Mr. Homath. This is so important that we are going to look for it everywhere because he wants to see it. So what ends up happening is that's why everywhere you look, all of a sudden you see this new car. Now, bring that back to the type of person that you're attracted to. This is what I asked your audience to do about 2-3 minutes ago. Think about that type of person you're attracted to. What's happening is you're feeding into your limbic system and you're feeding into even the reptilian system, and you're telling your brain, this is what's important to me. This is exactly what I'm looking for, whether it be 6 figures and 6 feet tall and a 6-pack abs and all that, or whatever it is. Maybe it's a blonde person or a brunette, but there's something specific that you want. So what's happening is your limbic system and your reptilian system is saying to the rest of your brain, this is what's important. So we're only going to focus on this. So whenever we see this, that's what we're going to focus our attention on, and everything else becomes invisible. So guys that are 6s and 7s and 5s and 4s, they don't even matter. They don't exist because your reticular activating system is saying, that's not what she's looking for, or that's not what he's looking for. This person is looking for that. So they ignore everything else. So that's what's happening.
Kind of like how that works. You just get tuned right out.
Yeah, exactly. So you're literally brainwashing yourself in a very slight sense. And I'll show you how that works a little bit later. But the other part of that system, and I'll go into this when we get a little bit further, is a little pea-sized piece that sits on the front of the hippocampus in your limbic system. And it's called the nucleus accumbens. And what that does is that has a memory of anything that gave you a dopamine rush or some type of a serotonin hit, something that made you feel good. And then what it happens is it remembers what that activity was, and it will constantly seek out regaining that activity. So it will constantly talk the rest of your brain into moving toward that thing that gave you the dopamine rush, i.e. the person that's 6-pack abs, 6 feet tall, 6-figure salary, whatever it is that you're looking for, the beautiful house, the nice job, the authority, the CEO, the guy in the C-suite. Your nucleus accumbens is saying, that's what gives this person a dopamine rush. That's what we're going to find. So no matter what, we're going to work in concert with the reticular activating system, and we are going to remember exactly what that formula was that caused that dopamine rush, and we're going to go find it.
Yeah, so people are getting coded to see the world in a certain way, and the things that they want are in the lower portions of the brain, in the heart and the gut levels of thinking. They're taking in information from your senses and filtering out what they don't want to see. So now all of a sudden the world looks very different, and it's because of what you've been exposed to. It's because of the information that you've been exposed to repeatedly.
That is absolutely true. And it's exactly the same. What I just said lines up perfectly with what you're showing as the head and the heart and the gut. And the interesting thing about this is sometimes women don't think about this. And I want to go in just for a second into how it is and why it is that we actually literally get attached to somebody. Yeah. That is something that many times women don't think about. And the way that it works out sort of in a nutshell is this: the bonding sort of hormone, the bonding hormone in your body that makes you desire to be with somebody is called oxytocin.
Yep.
Now, oxytocin is different than the other ones. It's different than serotonin, that gives you that sense of peace. It's different than dopamine, which gives you that rush of excitement. It's different from adrenaline that gets everything going. When you get to oxytocin, that's what makes you want to form a long-term relationship with somebody. And this is where it gets sideways. Women think that men think like they think, and vice versa. So what happens is women will give themselves to the guy that they want, but the guy will not commit. But she's now attached and he's not, and she doesn't understand what's happening. So what's happening is when you, let's just say climax, when you climax as a man, you don't excrete oxytocin. Actually, it's so minute that it's inconsequential. It does nothing. Whereas when a woman climaxes, she excretes at minimum 14 times the normal amount of oxytocin. So she becomes connected or attached. And she doesn't understand why this guy's perfect. He's a 9. He's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm beautiful and I gave myself to him, but he will not commit. It's because he's not attached. And it's not necessarily that he's a jerk. It's that when it comes to the physiology of the body, he's not excreting the bonding hormone that she's excreting. And she's producing minimum of 14 times the amount of bonding agent, of bonding hormone.
Right. That's this part on I made this one recently, the situationship evasion chart. That's this part right here. This is what I'm trying to show women on this chart. The green lines are the smart decisions where you talk about what you want and make him prove that he's going to give you something worthwhile first before you get the oxytocin flowing, before you get the attachment. What people are doing today is just jumping into the dating nightmare of God knows who you're dating, as seeing someone casually, getting attached here, and then later saying, hey, by the way, are you going to offer me commitment? And then it's usually no, and usually get into this terrible mess. So a lot of my viewers will be aware that, I talk a lot about how girls are, they get attached to astrology and they want to believe that they're having spiritual experiences when they're actually having like lower urges.
Mm-hmm.
That's tied very intimately into these kinds of processes, because it's even like socially acceptable now for girls to just have we call it a tingle. They have an experience, they're having a feeling, and they take it to be some kind of great spiritual experience when actually it is just a lower bodily urge that they're feeling. And that's kind of one of these a level 6y thing to do. My audience knows about that. The
Right.
breakdown of values, when you have a society that's at this level, they teach you what you're supposed to do with your urges, but up here it's like, well, I'm going to decide what to do with them. And so then most of what they decide ends up in the lower levels. So they have a feeling, they turn that feeling into a religion, and that makes it even that much easier for them to be convinced to do something that they wouldn't otherwise do.
Oh, it's so true. Many times they'll relate this to maybe karma or some type of a spiritual connection or maybe a soulmate or something like that. But it's simply an urge. We can track that. You can literally put probes onto your brain to see what part lights up when you cause those feelings by showing video pictures. You can take people that are sensing that they're having an experience of being supernaturally drawn to somebody, and you can actually show them visual pictures, and we can watch parts of their brain light up. It's not supernatural in the least. It's shooting dopamine, and it's actually even GABA, which is really funny because it's kind of goes back and forth, but it's mostly a dopamine hit, and it's really funny because once you get those reuptake inhibitors, once they pull back and that synapse fires again, all of a sudden you get this jolt, and then they believe it's like something supernatural, but it's not. And it's interesting because this would fall under the category, many people don't realize this when they're doing it, but it falls under the category of what's called magical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And magical thinking is where you truly believe that something is imbued with some sort of power, even though it's not. Like, if my horoscope says this, no matter what, it's going to happen. Well, that's not true, nor is it logical. It's magical. It's like, it's almost like believing in flying dragons or whatever. I don't know what you would think, but it's the same principle. It's imbuing something, meaning assigning value to something as truth that isn't truth, so that it continues to hold up your philosophy or your fantasy. Because if that can be true, then your fantasy is right. It's magical thinking, because if you can convince yourself that that's what's happening and you truly believe it, that fits under the category of delusion, but it's self-imposed, which again, most people don't like to hear that. No one wants to hear, oh, you're being delusional. You lose friends and neighbors that way. I don't know that that's the smartest thing to say to people, but when you're breaking it down, that's actually what's happening.
Yeah, it's mistaking an impulse for a reality. It's a way of recoding your impulses as some kind of a grand narrative or a sense of meaning, when it is actually just a feeling.
Yep, that's it. It's really interesting because the same components that go into exactly what you were just talking about are also the same components, those bonding components, and those sort of, they can be manipulative. And that's what's used in what's called cult brainwashing. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to lean into that just yet or not, but it's the same process and releasing of the same chemical situation that causes people to join and stay with cults.
Yeah. Yeah, I do know a fair bit about that. I have read about the cult brainwashing process. I know a couple people who've been in cults. I've met a few people who may or may not have been trying to build cults. And yeah, it is, I can't remember if it's one of the 3 main books that I recommend. It's either Win Bigly or the 48 Laws of Power, where they talk about how people who are very good at building cults, they know how to create the correct stimuli to be taken in to make people have feelings here that they then transform into beliefs about, this is the right place for me and this is the right thing for me to be doing.
That's absolutely true, because you have to play to people's desires and also to their needs. If you notice that most people that get involved in cults, they have something missing. They have a need of some sort. Look at the people that like David Koresh got a hold of, or look at the people that maybe a Jim Jones got a hold of. There was literally something missing in every single one of their lives. And when that is provided by this person who usually knows how to stimulate the vagus nerve in your body. I don't know if you're familiar with what that is or not, but have you ever felt like a gut feeling? Do you know what I mean by that? People talk about,
I'm not in like highly familiar with the vagus nerve. I've heard of it, but I'd love to hear how that relates.
I have a visual here for you. Let me show you. I have a couple of them. Let me go to this. Okay. Oops. It's not what I meant to do. Okay. Do you see the bright yellow nerve there? That's called the vagus nerve, and it's attached to not only the lower and mid parts of your brain, but it runs through your chest, and it has a ton of neurons that are in your belly and in your stomach. Here's another one that shows it. If you look at the yellow part there, that's the vagus nerve. And what happens is, people that run cults, just like people that know how to manipulate people, what they do is they know how to take that feeling and make it become a reality for them. Because if you stimulate people's belief system, like you were just talking about, people take feelings and they turn them into thoughts and beliefs. If you can stimulate that belief system, that will actually trickle down, if they're missing something, into stimulating the vagus nerve. And what that does is that gives them like a gut feeling or butterflies. This is why people that are with somebody they're attracted to, they say, oh, I had butterflies, or every time I'm around them, it's like my stomach is kind of moving around. It's the vagus nerve. And it's basically attached to your limbic system and part of the reptilian system under that, in your cerebellum. And all that's doing is it's transferring what's happening in the excitatory neurons, as well as all the emotion center of your brain. And it's stimulating that nerve. And as that stimulation runs down the nerve, all of a sudden you feel it in your stomach. And people that are narcissistic and people that have dark triad tendencies, they know how to play on this. People that run cults, they know how to play on this.
Yeah.
And it's really simple once you realize all you have to do is find the right person. I don't know if you're aware of this or not. You probably are, but many people are not. But about 25 to 27% of all human beings are what are called easily led, meaning if you just tell them something and you say it in a convincing way, they're in. It doesn't matter. So about a quarter of the population are easily led because they're missing something and they desire something to fill that void, and they will jump on anything that's given to them and they believe it. So that's a quarter of the population. And then you have just over a third of the population above that will be able to be persuaded, given the right proof and given the right social proof and given the right sort of
environment.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
the general sort of everyone around me is doing it, so I better do it too.
Almost like the bandwagon effect.
Yeah.
And then there's that piece above them, which is about a quarter to a third of the population that no matter what, you're getting nowhere. Absolutely not. And so what happens is people that start cults or that gravitate to taking people and pulling them around them, and narcissists that are malignant, they do this all the time. They create little crews of people to sort of elevate them and make them feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I would recommend, if you want to know like step by step how to do that, the 48 Laws of Power. Robert Greene. It's literally a step by step. But the funny thing is he's absolutely right, because these are things that we are trained in when we're dealing with people that do robberies or crimes or kidnappings. Many times they come out of a background that may not have been a cult, and some of them are, but from a background that's very similar. So part of the training is you have to know what are the markers of people that are being brainwashed in cults. We need to know those things. And everyone who's ever been in any type of an investigation or an interrogation situation, that's one of the first things that you look for are the signs of someone that's been through that or been involved in that.
Yeah. How do you recognize the signs?
Okay, that's a really good question. Well, first of all, are you asking about the signs about someone who's a victim or the signs about a perpetrator? Because they're two different things.
The victim. So I'm asking, what if you're seeing someone who has had their system played on and made them believe a certain thing or begin to behave in a certain way in a I don't know what kind of a fashion, like a exploitative fashion. Then how do you recognize that from behavior?
The primary way to look at that is you can read body language, because you can see people turtling, you can see people covering up their vital organs. And so I'll tell you really quick, body language and then vocabulary, what to look for if it's a victim. What you'll find out when it comes to body language, and we watch for this all the time, what you'll find is anybody that drops their chin or that in some way takes their hands and tucks them either across their groin or maybe does a little bit over the heart, or in some way somehow closes themselves off. It's not what you learned in high school, where if someone folds their arms, they're closing themselves off. That's not true in the least. That is absolutely not true. Anytime you touch your body, cross your arms, rub your legs, anything like this, it's called a self-soothing gesture. So you watch somebody who walks where their gait is relatively slow, meaning the way that they step. You watch where their eyes are. They will not usually make eye contact with someone that they see that may be an authority figure. They will divert their eyes. They will drop their chin, and part of the body language of dropping your chin is something that goes back to prehistoric times, because when you drop your chin, you're protecting the jugular vein, you're protecting your throat and all that kind of stuff. So some of the visual cues are, what are they doing with eye contact? How is their demeanor by way of what it is that they're doing to close off sections of their body? Specifically, if you see them dropping their chin, or if you see them taking their hands and doing what's called the fig leaf, where they cover up their groin area in men. And in women, it's slightly different. They will literally take their hands and cover or hold onto their stomach. And they don't know why. They're like, why aren't there? Many people have said, why don't they cover up their groin like men do? Well, because what's important to men is that thing that makes babies. What's important to women is the womb where the babies are made.
Yeah, the interior, the carrying area. So
the carrying area.
Why do these people do these behaviors?
This is really interesting, because it goes hand in hand with some of the vocabulary that we'll get to in a minute. Remember, if you've been in a cult, more than likely you are part of that 25 to 27% that is what's called easily led, meaning they're missing something. When you're missing something, you are drawn to anything that will give you stability. And if you notice cults, they're like, oh, you're part of us. You learn how to dress like us. You learn to talk like us. And part of that is what's called cloistering. I don't know if you know what that is or not, but a cult, just like an old convent or a place where you would find nuns in the old days or find monks, what they do is they cloister. And what that means is they seal themselves off from the outside world. And it's not that they never have contact, because sometimes they do. You have to buy things, you have to deal with people. But for the most part, they come together and they develop their own mannerisms. They develop their own words. They develop their own phrases. And this is part of what you see in cult people. You'll see them say things. This is why I wanted to get to the vocabulary. You'll see them say things that don't sound like what normal people would say. You'll see them act ways and mannerisms that you're like, that's odd. And it's because that's part of what they've learned by being cloistered, which means to be kind of sealed away from everybody else. So part of that is, and you said, why is it that they do that? It's because basically they're missing something. They have a need for something. And that's what draws them in the first place, because a cult will make you feel very important. They will cloister you. And for someone who doesn't have what they want, that's very, very... it's very enticing, because all of a sudden you feel like you're desired, you're wanted. So now you're part of this organization, even though it's a small organization and it's really weird, they're still showering you with what you think is affection, but it's grooming.
So then they do those protective behaviors during the grooming, you're saying?
Yeah, correct. Because what they learn, and this is where it gets interesting, what they learn is part of a good cult leader. It's really like about a 10-step process. Let me just give you sort of a really quick, not every step, but some of them. Part of that is you have an authority figure that rises up, and everything we're going to discuss tonight, if you aren't seen as an authority, none of this will work. So you bring these people in that have a need, and you present yourself as the person with the answer to that need. And then what you do is a good cult leader will then create what's called an us versus them. And this is where those protective behaviors come from, because you want your subjects to feel like they're part of not only the family, but now they have to defend the group. They have to defend the organism. Part of that is you must have an adversary. And it can be the federal government. It can be anybody. It can be anyone that the cult leader decides is the enemy, because you have to have an us versus them to have them draw in and begin to subject themselves to presenting protective behaviors, because you want them as weak-willed as possible, and you want them to be as unproblematic as possible. And so once you've created yourself as an authority, and you've also sort of manifested and created an us versus them, now they get skittish about everyone around them, because the constant feedback they're getting is everyone who's outside of us wants to hurt us. Everyone that's outside of us doesn't want us to survive. They want to take things from us. And it's like a litany of things that you go through. And someone who's already found themselves there, that's missing things in the first place and is easily led, they will believe this. And so what they do is they learn self-protective sort of mannerisms, and they learn self-protective language. And part of that is once you get them to understand that us versus them, and you keep them isolated, that's the biggest part. You have to keep them isolated. Then what ends up happening is they will cut you off from even your family members. Yeah. And once you're cut off from family members, there is no support group except for the cult. And they all love me and they all care about me, even though once they've done this, once they've created us versus them, once they've created themselves to be an authority, once they've isolated you from your friends and then cut you off from your family, you are now literally a person that is a piece of clay to be molded. And you wouldn't be there if you were stronger mentally. You wouldn't be there if you're one of that 25 to 26% that will never be talked into anything. And you wouldn't be there even if you're part of that probably 30% that can be talked into most things. It would be the lower end of those people that would still stay. It would also be the people, again, that have nothing else, and they cling to what they've been given. So everything is an enemy. Everything is scary. Everything wants to wreck what I have, and this is all that I have. So that's where the self-protective sort of mannerisms come from.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of what we went through a few years ago. It seems like there were a bunch of possible operations to target that lower the most easily influenced 25% of people
Mm-hmm.
through the media, showing people sounds and images that targeted their lower brain, released the right kinds of chemicals, and made them begin to organize into cloistered groups.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of broke them off into one very highly sensitive part of our entire society, began marching in lockstep when we were all, staying in our homes for a while, which was a
Yeah.
form of isolation. And
Mm-hmm.
when they began getting all sort of crazy,
Mm-hmm.
then that would influence the people who are likely to follow once something becomes a trend.
Absolutely. And then it's interesting that you say that, because part of that a lot of people don't understand is that when creating a cult, two of the things that are left that are part of the process is you ask them to make sacrifices, no matter what that is, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's some type of a resource allocation or signing over things that you own. So you're asking them to make a commitment so that you can take something from them by way of sacrifice. And then the other piece of it, which has everything to do with what you just said, is to keep people under control. You give them rituals they must perform. Part of the rituals you must perform are you must wear this, or you can only wear this, or women have to dress like this, men have to dress like this, or you have to do this, or you have to wear this specific thing because everything's a threat. And you can kind of connect those dots on things that everyone was told to wear for quite a while.
Yeah.
That's all part of the process. And all that it does, it's not that the government is inherently evil. It's that for the most part, they want you easily controlled, which is kind of where we're going to end up eventually tonight. And part of easily controlling somebody is creating a scenario where people are afraid, like in a cult. Somebody's going to hurt you. Somebody's going to take somebody's going to take your health away. Somebody's going to cough on you and it's going to kill your grandma. And so you have to do these rituals and you have to wear these things. It's like what a salesperson uses with the foot in the door effect. It's foot in the door is where somebody says something and then you let them say one more thing and then they say another thing. And pretty soon you're listening to this sales pitch. It's because you gave them an inch and then you gave them another inch. And if you go back to the thing we're sort of quasi talking about, we were told things like, and we'll get into this in a few minutes, but we were told things like 15 days to flatten the curve. And everybody's like, well, we don't know any different, so let's just do it. And then that led to, you have to wear these things. You have to get this shot. You have to stay 6 feet apart. You have to never go back to your office. You can't be around your family and friends. And it just kept going and going and going. And if you notice, that's the foot in the door effect. And once you have people that have rituals to perform and they perform them, those people that perform them, have you noticed that some people are still wearing those things, driving around their cars by themselves right now?
Yep. It's part of the identity now.
The identity, right? So not everyone will fall for that or do that, but many will. That's the problem. That's the easily led. That's the easily convinced. These are people that are drug into ideologies and they were once kind of normal, but now they're like militant with this thing. It's like, that makes no sense. That's part of the process as well.
Yeah. It's because it's, they are, would you say, what percentage would you say is that they are just sort of like biologically set up for it, and what percentage would you say are life conditions?
Okay, good. I'm glad you asked that, because we're talking nature versus nurture here. Mm-hmm. It's going to all depend. Everything comes down to your sort of personality traits, because if you have an agreeable nature, it's part of the big five in psychology. It's OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. If you're high in agreeableness, that means you'll do anything for someone else and you will take a back seat and not get anything for yourself because everyone else is more important. So part of that is how you're born, like you're talking about nature versus nurture. Some of it can be through the implication of how you're raised or how you're treated or what your family situation is. So the way I actually have those statistics, and the amount of people, it's uncanny. It's a little bit larger than the easily led crowd, because easily led can come in any form or fashion, whereas what you're talking about is on top of that by way of what's called personality traits, or the way that you're made up in that regard. And so when you take people like that, you can easily add another 10 to 15%. So if you're starting with 25% and you add 15%, all you have to do is do the math. Now you're up to between 35 and 40% of people.
Yeah.
And that's because you've lumped in now people that are agreeable.
Yeah.
And again, an agreeable person will do all the work and never take the credit. They will allow themselves to be bullied. They will allow themselves to never get the reward because other people are more important. And I want to be friends with everybody. That's an agreeable person. And it's not a huge amount of people, but it's about 7 to 10% of people are really high in agreeableness, primarily women. And if you look at, you know how you use the bell curve on many of your charts? If you look at that bell curve, when it comes to agreeableness, it's like depending on which resource you look at, it can be up to 60-40 split by way of women that are more agreeable than men. Let me blow you up here. Yeah, that's exactly
a lot of things between women and men, like agreeableness and height and so on and so forth, are shaped like that. This one is IQ, but this one is, there are some things that just either women have more of or men have more of, and there's very few outliers.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Which is really interesting, because if you don't mind, we can kind of lean a little bit into kind of hypnotism and brainwashing at this point, which is all kind of related. And if you're okay with that, people ask me all the time, can someone be hypnotized? Absolutely. Absolutely, people can. Yeah. And all that means is being in some way persuaded to do something that you may not normally do. Now, people ask all the time, and this is where it's going to get interesting. People ask all the time, they say things like, well, I have heard that you could never be hypnotized to do something that is completely against like your character or your belief system or all that. That is true in a certain amount of people, but it's not true in other people. And again, this is an area of my study, and it's an area that I've physically been a part of for many years. But anytime you do interrogation, you have to know these types of things. And let me give you sort of a quick synopsis on that. There's a method called PCP. I don't know if you want to write that down or not, but it's called PCP. And it's perception, context, and permission. So what that means is, perception is what you see and what you understand. And then context is where and how it's happening. And then permission is something you either give yourself or you don't. So if someone is sort of talked into believing, and I can tell you right now, I can give you case examples of this happening. If someone can be talked into believing that they're in a specific place, they will do a specific thing. Let me give you an example. I can tell you right now that you and I, at no point in this conversation, are going to think it's a great idea to get up and take all your clothes off. Probably at no point in this conversation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now go with me on this. But would you also agree that at some point, Mr. Homath is in some sort of a context where taking off your clothes is relatively normal, like maybe getting into a bathtub? Would you agree with me there?
Yes.
Okay. So what we have to do is, if you know what you're doing and you can get the right person, and I'll show you what to look for in that in just a second, all you have to do is alter someone's context and also alter someone's perception by way of persuasive talk. And then all of a sudden, they will give themselves permission to do the thing. Now, would you normally, and be honest, would you normally just in a public situation rip off your clothes and run around the room? Would you do that?
Not usually.
Not usually me either. Yeah, my wife that would be the end of that relationship.
Yeah.
So, but as I said, if I can get you to think that the context is not running around in front of people at a Walmart, but instead I make you believe that you just got home from work, you just had, a meal, it's getting late, you want to get cleaned up. So you know what? It's time to head for the bathroom. And once you get in the bathroom, the next thing you do, or however, or wherever, you begin to disrobe. And that may sound really weird, but I won't give you names, but I can give you cases right now that are in court, one in Seattle, one in Boston, another one in Dallas, where hypnotherapists are facing charges for doing exactly this. What they do is they take someone, and it has to be the right person. It does not work on everybody. And I'll tell you what to look for in that in just a minute.
Yeah.
They've literally gotten women in their office to say, okay, let's go into some hypnotherapy. And they begin to say, okay, your eyes are relaxed, or, all that stuff that you see on TV. It's not quite like that, but it's sort of. Yeah. And once they get them in a state of relaxation, their perception is completely different. And what happens is you convince them, you just got home, you just had a glass of wine. It's time to wind down. I think it's time that maybe you get into, some nightgown or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that means you got to take off something to put on the nightgown. And so now what you've done is you altered the perception, and you've also altered the context. And because you've got them convinced in their mind that they're simply at home, all of a sudden they give themselves permission. That's where the PCP comes in. And when they give themselves permission, they will take off their clothes. And I can tell you right now, I could give you names. I won't, but I could give you names of people who are in court right now for doing exactly that. And what happens is, it's not like they have amnesia. Some people do, but it's not. Most of them would be like, was that a dream? What happened? But some people are like, wait a minute, how did I get this mark on me, and what's going on here? And then they realize, oh yeah, that's something that wasn't a dream. And they file charges. So this happens all the time. Now, part of that is, again, when it comes to hypnotism itself, is it real? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it only works on certain people. Now, I can give you, in a very broad brush sense, I'll tell you who it doesn't work on. It doesn't generally work on people who are in the cluster A personality disorder sort of category, which is where you find schizophrenic, schizotypal, delusional, people like this. And the reason why, the biggest reason why, is that you have what's called the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, which is right here. The dorsal medial prefrontal cortex. The job that has in your brain is to be concerned about everything that needs to be concerned about. So if you are driving in the snow and you've got a bunch of children in the back of your vehicle, you are on alert, and that dorsal medial prefrontal cortex is working overtime. It's sizzling because it's looking for every threat. It's looking for every possibility of a problem, because you have precious cargo, you have kids in the back, and it's snowing.
Yeah,
it's looking for everything, because its job is to look for anything that might be a threat. So when it's going, it's on. Now, what happens is with cluster A people, most of them, not all, but most of them, back to your bell curve, the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex is always on overtime. It's always worrying about what needs to be worried about. This is why you get delusion. This is why you get anxiety. This is why you get schizotypal. This is why you get schizophrenic people, because it's constantly cooking. Now, what does that have to do with hypnotism? No one whose dorsal medial prefrontal cortex is on can be hypnotized, because it's constantly looking for threat. It's constantly evaluating everything to see, is this a problem?
Does that have anything to do with hypervigilance?
It does. It absolutely does. Hypervigilance, that comes straight from your prefrontal cortex as well as from part of your temporal lobe. But yes, absolutely it does.
So, for example, those people who got hypnotized and ended up, doing silly things in an office and then suing, they basically, in the same way that you might go out and see somebody impressive or someone attractive, and then they have the exterior traits that make you like them or trust them, and they have the knowledge of what to do with those traits. They can just use their image in your eyes to control the way that your brain works, to set your body up to do what they want you to do, which can get you into a bad situation if you get hypnotized, if you end up in a cult, if you end up, I didn't draw the cloistering, but I know people that's happened to. And there are ways to defend against that, one of which is just being a certain type of thinker.
Absolutely. That's 100% accurate.
Yeah. Yep. So in the same way that I am trying to teach people to change themselves, to use this structure to change who you are so that you can be something that people react to differently. The pickup artist community and people who, are more comfortable being manipulative with these kinds of things, what they do is they study not just what to do, not just knowing how, but also changing themselves into the kind of person that is reacted to in that way, the sort of person who creates these feelings that can then be used in order to manipulate behavior. This is something that some guys use for just getting girls, like, for example, social proof. That's one of the things. If you can even pretend that you're popular in a way that's convincing, it makes women like you more, and then more of them like you, and they cluster around you. And it's a way of manipulating minds very effectively and very quickly.
Very true.
Yeah. So there are examples of this happening right now. Like people talk about Andrew Tate a lot. I'm not sure how much I should say about him. I know he responds to my tweets from time to time, but he's living in a situation where he's got like a whole bunch of kind of wives. He has sort of a harem. He's made himself into this guy by showing women, the kind of traits that they react to in that way.
It's funny you brought up Andrew Tate, and this is a guy that I don't believe that he truly knows exactly what he's doing, but he does specific things that if you were to start wanting to brainwash somebody to do what you wanted them to do, he does all the right things. And part of that is, again, remember what I said earlier, if you are not seen as an authority figure, none of this works. So let's say you were somebody like an Andrew Tate. If you wanted to have a harem of people and you wanted to have a bunch of people who would not question you but do what you told them to do or ask them to do, regardless of whether it's OnlyFans or whatever, you need to do, again, you have to be the authority figure, which he's already set himself up to be. And then it comes to status and money. And part of that is surrounding yourself with what kind of vehicle do you drive? You remember how many videos you've seen where he talks about his Bugatti and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah. He's always making it really obvious that he has stuff. Cool stuff.
Yeah. Because as you know, as you've been talking about for a long time on your videos, most women are attracted to men who are in positions of power and authority and have wealth or at least access to resources. Well, you set yourself up as being a person of high status, that you have access to resources, primarily money, that you have expensive clothing, that you have expensive vehicles, anything that can be flashy to be shown. Once you've done this, that takes someone who is in need of something, which is many times the girls that you find that do OnlyFans. Yes, some of them are like make huge amounts of money and do anything they want, but many that get involved in it because they don't have other options and they don't know what else to do. And somebody said, hey, baby, I can make you $1 million doing this. And they believe them because, like you were saying, the social proof is so huge. So if you have people around you that can attest to your value, that's social proof, then people pay attention. If you've set yourself up to be the authority and you have status and you have money and you have a Bugatti or two and you have clothing that sort of matches what it is that you're saying, then what you do is you invite people into that world. And that's exactly what he did. And then there's a process that he uses that, believe it or not, is used by the CIA. And that process, and I don't know that he knows what he's doing because this takes years of training. I've sat through the training. But here's what you do. One is once you get them to buy into who you are, this is where you isolate them and you bring in engagement of feelings. You engage the limbic system. You got to get their feelings moving. If you notice, many of these girls look at him and think that he's like their boyfriend. So he's engaged their feelings. After you engage their feelings and emotions, then the next thing that you need to do to start to hammer down to keep them in what you're building is you have to introduce copious amounts of stress. You have to give them stressful things to think about, i.e., I have all the money, I have all the resources, I control your destiny. Therefore, if you decide to leave, you will be nothing, you will be broke, or in some cases, people use even worse threats than that. So you've taken somebody who's in need and you brought them into this situation where you're the greatest thing in the world and you provide everything. You have everything, and without you, there is nothing. It's all psychological. You engage their emotions. You engage how they feel about stuff, because women are primarily drawn by or motivated by feelings. And once you do that and you start to create a situation where you bring in stress and you make it kind of volatile, then what happens is they begin to feel unsure of themselves. And the louder you speak and the more violent, not physically, but the more violent your verbiage becomes, by way of, if you do this, I will do this, or you will have nothing, or you will be nothing, you'll be broke, you'll be in the gutter. People believe that once they've been brought in. And so what ends up happening is, after you do the copious amounts of stress, you basically rinse and repeat. So after you've stressed them out, you reward them. You call them kind words. You give them furs. You give them nice things. Maybe you take them out shopping. All of a sudden, their heart starts to change again. And then what happens is, once they get comfortable, stress has to come again. This is actually a process used by the FBI, the CIA, and all marketing agencies, including your smartphone. It's called fractionation. I don't know if you know this or not. Fractionation is where you bring somebody up and then bring them down. The way that you probably, and your people that watch this channel probably see it all the time, is you take your phone. Let's say you're scrolling through your, let's say you're scrolling through a Facebook feed or your Instagram feed. And all of a sudden you see a bunch of, like, let's go to like Facebook. You see pictures of families. You see, oh, look, it's a cute little panda bear. Oh, look at this great thing that's happening in sports. And then all of a sudden, boom, war in the Middle East. People are dying in Ukraine. And then all of a sudden your entire countenance changes. And then when you keep scrolling, now it's back to, oh, look at this recipe that I like. Oh, look at this great thing. So you're being warmed up again. And then a few minutes later, you're scrolling and it's like, Hamas takes hostages. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's called fractionation. And all that means is you bring someone up and take them down. By the way, this is how you break a narcissist. When we get into that, I'll tell you what that means. But so Andrew Tate and people like that, they use fractionation. Again, I don't think he knows he's doing this, but he knows that he brings them out, buys them furs and nice dinners and says nice things to them. Then he brings them back and treats them horribly, and fear just registers fear all through their body, gets them thinking about stress and what am I going to do if he doesn't want me? What am I going to do if he gets rid of me? This is how you make someone be part of your organization and be afraid to leave, because you provide everything. And you've convinced them that without you, they lose everything. And that's where the fractionation comes in.
This is a lot how social media works too. I've used this graphic a whole bunch of times. You're on the phone cycling through your feed, doom scrolling, and you get a lot of different feelings that work, quite the same way as this. You're just viewing things, and very, very quickly it's causing these chemical reactions and you're getting feelings. And then all of a sudden, they throw something bad at you, and then you feel the negative feeling. You feel man bad, and then that's an example of fractionation as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. True.
Your phone's doing it to you also.
Absolutely. Yep. And what that does is that causes instability in your emotion. And and here's why this is important. What do you do when you cause instability in emotion? You cause the person who's feeling the instability to grab tightly on to the first thing that looks like security. It's like, if I were to push you, I mean, I don't dislike you, but let's say we didn't get along and I were to push you into a hole. Well, your body would be grabbing at anything. Like it wouldn't matter if it was like sticker bushes. It wouldn't matter if it was chain link. It wouldn't matter if it was razor wire, because you're falling, you grab at anything to stop yourself. And that's exactly what your brain does. It just grabs onto the first thing that looks solid or looks secure or looks like it's not going to hurt you. So it's the same thing, falling and you grab a hold. Like if you've ever fallen down at home and you just you reach out and you grab for anything, whether it's your refrigerator or a countertop or a chair, like anything. Well, that's exactly what's happening when you're talking about that man bad, because
it's like when people try to catch a falling knife.
Yes. Oh, exactly. That's a good way to put it. Very good way to put it. also, this is something that is used by the CIA, and there have been operatives that many people don't realize were protected by the government under certain organizations and operations. And you can even look like at a Charles Manson. He did not have any idea why what he was doing was successful, but it's exactly the same as that other person we were just talking about. It was that he provided the answer to a need for people. And if you look at the people that he recruited, they were all people that had needs. Let's just put it that way. I don't want to say anything bad, but they were all people that had very specific needs of fitting into a family, fitting into a love organization that would embrace them. That's why they call the Charles Manson family. Now, he would do exactly the same thing. He would work with people, and he would work on the minds of people. Many times he would use drugs, he would use mind-altering substances, and then he would pretend he was doing it himself. Many people don't know this. He didn't do it most of the time. He didn't do it himself, but he would get his people, his family, his group of people that he had closer unto himself, and he would get them to do the experimental drugs. And that, if you know anything about how that type of stuff works, that you want to talk about opening your mind to embrace an ideology or embrace something new or something that's sort of novel. That's what you do, because it drops all of your susceptibility. It makes it to where none of your natural defenses go up. So you just receive the information. And it's really scary, because this was actually something that was used in the MK Ultra program. That's, I don't know if I'll go into that or not, but that was also used in that particular program for your people. If you want to really learn about this kind of stuff, look up MK Ultra. That's everything that you want to know. But yeah, Manson had no idea what he was doing. He just knew that if he said certain things and gave people certain things and provided a place for them to live, then all of a sudden he became this powerful entity. And many people go, how the heck did he ever afford this stuff? How could he afford to bring these people in? And that's where it gets interesting, because there were people behind the scenes that I'm not really at liberty to talk about this part, but there were people that were paying bills for him that a lot of people don't know about. And then if you look at, well, how is it that this kind of street bum who's a hippie and doesn't really own anything, how is he in a position of status or authority? Well, this is the thing. He did he was doing like that. I'm the modern day Jesus thing. I'm a modern day prophet. And he was a singer and he was a songwriter. And back in that time period, I know not so much anymore. If you see a dude with long hair and a beard who's strumming an acoustic guitar and singing songs about war is bad and love is good and all that, that wouldn't carry any weight now. But back then, girls flocked to that. And that's why they saw him, because he was as some people say in the red pill world, he was a contextual alpha, which is true, because in that context, he was the guy. And everyone was drawn to that had that need, because he had offered a family, he offered a place to stay, he offered drugs for them to do, he offered a fight for them to get involved in, a cause for them to stand up for, which again is much like the person we were just talking about. And they had great fear of leaving or saying no, because without that family, they would have nothing. See if that sounds familiar. We were just sort of talking about that.
Yeah. So then the way that I'm putting this together, according to the system that I use, is that the way that these things work most effectively is that you find people, which I guess Manson did by accident, but what you do is you find somebody who is missing the meaning part of their lives, the belonging part of their lives, and then you cause the right feelings and impulses in them, and you offer them the belonging, and it becomes a sense of meaning, and it gets attached to their identity very quickly.
Very true. And that's what gives them a sense of value, a sense of worth, and a sense of belonging, because you just gave them meaning that they didn't have before.
Yeah.
One of the things that you have to understand with people that are supplying needs is you have to look at what the person desires. In other words, what is their need? And they come in basically 6 categories. And you have people that need significance. And in a place like that, you would have to offer them a way to be significant. There are other people that need approval. They don't need to be significant, but they need to be approved of. They need approval. And so you approve of what they do. You build them up in what they do, and that draws them to you. Another way would be acceptance. They need to be accepted for whatever it is that they don't feel accepted for. So maybe they don't need to be significant, or they don't need to have like great amounts of approval, but they want to be accepted because they're different. So if you accept them, that opens the door to them. And then there are people that need to be seen as intelligent, and they don't need to be significant. They don't need to be accepted. They just need to feel as though they're smarter than everybody else. And that's kind of easy to cater to that. It's not hard. Narcissists love that. And you can work them all day long with that, because there's a need for being seen as intelligent. And then there's two more. One is there are people that need to be seen as powerful. So maybe they don't need to be they don't need to be significant. They don't need to be accepted. They want to be powerful. They want to be maybe even feared. They want to have a sense of authority. So they need to be feeling powerful. And then the last one is there are people that that will look for a sense of provoking pity. So that's their need. They need to be pitied. They want you to poorly for them. They want you to hear their story, cry with them, and embrace them, because they need you to feel pity for them. So those are the 6 sort of categories that all people that have quote unquote needs, they fall under one of those categories. They all. So you can just pick one of those, and that would address almost everyone who gets involved in some type of an organization, whether it be a cult or something else, where there is a supreme ruler that sort of runs everything, and they feel sucked into that. They have one of those 6 needs, and all you have to do is feed one of those needs.
That reminds me of a few years ago, too, that you get acceptance by following the rules. You get significance by enforcing the rules. You get approval by doing what everyone wants you to do. You get power by, you get the petty tyrants. Do it or else I'll report you. It'll get you fired from your job. And then you get the sympathy. Oh, bad things happen to me, and I care about the people that the bad things happen to. That all was going on during that time.
That's so true. Yeah, it's perfect.
So far we talked about what it is that I do. I explain what's happening in these lower parts of the brain so that people can understand it. We talked about how you leverage this knowledge to make people react to you in the way that you want. If you're going to try to self-maximize, become a better person, get more of what you want out of life. And then you led me through how people can game this process in order to turn people's impulses into a sense of meaning and identity by providing the sense of belonging that mediates them. So now you're going to, I understand, lead us through like an official version of the process, right?
Sure. Absolutely. Yep. And what I'm going to show you here in just a second is the 6 items that are needed to cause any normal person can be talked into committing murder in 35 minutes or less by using this exact step. And so I'll just really quick, I'll give it to you. There's 6 components that you need, and you only need 3 of them, but you need a lot of 3 of them out of the 6. But if you can have 6, if you have 6 and if you have all 6 of these and a lot of them, you can turn a human being into a zombie-like slave, and it's been done. So let me give you those pieces. One of the 6 pieces is you have to have what's called suggestibility.
Yeah.
And then another one is you have to have focus. Then another one is you have to have openness. Another one is connection. And then the last 2 are compliance and expectancy. And let me explain how this works. These are, if you can imagine, these are like buckets or glasses or bowls of things. And if you can fill almost to the full 3 of them, you can talk anyone into just about anything. If you can fill up more than that, like if you can get all 6, you can literally talk anyone into anything. And let me give you an example of how this was done. And anyone can look this up. You can look up what's called the Milgram experiment. And this was done by Stanley Milgram in the 60s. And it was replicated many, many times. And it had exactly the same results every time. And what happened was people that were on a college campus were flooded with these little brochures that said, hey, we're doing a human behavior experiment. And if you want to participate, we'll buy you lunch and, give you a voucher for whatever. It was in the 60s, so it wasn't a lot of money, but to them it was. So
Yeah.
come on down. They said it'll take an hour of your time, but we're just doing an experiment. So a bunch of kids came down. I say kids, but they're in early 20s.
Sure.
And they came down to the lab. And so what happened was they would come into the lab and they were told this. They were said, okay, we're going to do an experiment with the person here. And we need someone to be a teacher and someone to be a learner or a student.
Mm-hmm.
And so they drew straws to see who could be who and all that stuff. Well, what they didn't realize is none of them what they didn't realize is that all of the people that were involved were in on it, and they were only going to take one person. So in other words, they weren't really going to have a teacher and a student or a learner. They were actually only going to have a teacher. So here's the way it works. You have Stanley Milgram. He's in a lab coat. So when he's in a white coat, which gives you that authority bias, because if someone's in a lab coat, you think that they have power and authority. You walk into a doctor's office, they're wearing a lab coat, you do whatever they tell you.
Right.
So he's wearing a white lab coat and he's got a clipboard. And you walk in, let's say you're the college student that got picked. Well, you walk in and you think that everyone is part of the experiment, but really you're the only one that's part of the experiment. Mm-hmm. And what happens is Dr. Milgram is standing behind you. You're sitting in a chair, and in front of you, you have a box that has all these buttons on it. And these are electric shock buttons. Mm-hmm. And so he says, look, it goes all the way from 5 volts up to 450 volts. Well, 250 can kill a person if they have a heart condition, but 450, no one can survive that. So you're given that, and now you're a college kid, and you're like, okay, what do I do? And he said, what we're going to do is we're going to have the learner, because that person's going to be the teacher. The kid's going to be the teacher. We're going to have the learner who drew the other straw go on the other side of this wall, and we're gonna strap him into the equivalent of like what looks like an electric chair, but it's not. But they have electrodes placed all over their body. Mm-hmm. And then the kid who's in the experiment, who doesn't know what's going on, sees all this happening. And then after that person is sat down, the kid that's the teacher, he's given a list of words to read. Mm-hmm. Every time he reads the words, the learner on the other side has to repeat the words exactly in the same order. And if he doesn't, you shock him.
Right.
So Dr. Milgram goes, okay, let's go. So the kid starts saying the words. And as the other person is repeating them back, he's intentionally, the kid doesn't know this, but he's intentionally getting them wrong, which will cause the kid to have to shock him. So he'll read like apple, banana, grape. And the guy will say like, I don't know, pickle, beef jerky, and a Cadillac or whatever. He'll just say what's wrong. And then the doctor will say, you have to hit the button. So the kid will be like, meh. And at first, after the first few, the guy's like, oh, like you could hear him like a little bit of this.
Yeah.
The deal. Well, by the time you get to about 100 volts, the guy is like, he's howling. He's like, oh, but it's not like excruciating, but it's bad. Mm-hmm. Well, they get 250 volts. So 250 volts will kill most people. Mm-hmm. When you hit 250 volts, the guy on the other side is begging for it to stop. He's saying, please, I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. I have a heart condition. And then the kid looks up, the guy in the lab coat, and the guy in the lab coat says, sorry, any incorrect answer has to be punished. Please hit the button. So he hits the button, and he hits the button. Now they finally get up to 450. And by about 400, he's not even making sounds anymore. Mm-hmm. So when he reads off the words, the guy doesn't repeat them. And he goes, well, what do I do? And the doctor says, any incorrect answer or any non-answer is incorrect. Hit the button. So he hits the button all the way to 450. Now, here's the way that it worked out. Before they did the experiment, they sat with a group of psychologists and they said, how many people do you think will go all the way? They believed it would be 0.8% of people that go all the way, because you have to be a psychopath. You have to be a crazy person to want to do that to somebody. Well, guess what? Guess what percentage of people went to 250 volts?
I think I remember it was like 80.
100% of people went to 250 volts. Every single one of them. Guess how many people went to 450 volts?
Maybe that was the 80.
Of 67%. So
67,
you're 67% went all the way to killing somebody.
Yeah.
And I mean, not literally, but they thought they were.
Right. They thought they were doing it. Yeah. What were the elements that you just gave me, the 6 things that were needed? What was at play there?
Okay, that's perfect. They actually only had about 3 of them.
Mhm.
So what we have is we have suggestibility, focus, openness, connection, compliance, and expectancy.
Yeah.
They had no connection, so that was gone.
Right.
They had they didn't have any expectancy. They didn't know what to expect, so that was gone.
Right.
The ones that were at play were compliance and also suggestibility and focus. So the ones that were missing was openness, connection, and expectancy, because no one knew what to expect.
Explain that for me. You said compliance.
Yeah, that's the fear of disobeying someone in authority. That's
Okay.
because he had a white lab coat on and a clipboard. Whatever he said, you just do it. You have to hit the button. So he hit the button.
Yeah. So then compliance comes from feeling like they have to obey authority, even though there wasn't really any reason they had to.
Right. They were there for a free sandwich and like a $10 voucher. That literally there for lunch.
Right.
And being part of an experiment. So yeah, they had a fear of rebuking or saying no to authority.
Okay. And then what was the next one?
It was suggestibility.
Mhm.
They were open to the suggestion of doing so, because they had an opportunity when they first sat him down and said, you're going to shock this person every time he gets the thing wrong.
Mhm.
They were willing to try it. So they were suggestible enough to give it a shot. They just probably didn't realize how far they would end up going.
Okay.
So they had suggestibility. They were able to be suggested to do something, and they complied with it. And the compliance again is just the fear of saying no to an authority. So the suggestibility was there, and then the big one, my friend, is focus.
Focus. Okay.
Focus, that's the big one. Whenever you bring someone, and this leads on to all the other stuff I'm going to talk about with the government.
Mhm.
Focus is everything. If you don't have focus, you get nothing. And what that means is you give them something to either fear or something that is novel, meaning brand new. Well, here's what they had that was brand new. They went to a laboratory they'd never been to, sat in front of a shocking machine they'd never seen, and were at the behest of a doctor they were afraid of. So anytime you give a human being something that's not part of their heuristics, I'm sorry, big word, that's not part of what they expect or something that they're accustomed to, it's immediate focus. It's like if you're driving down the road, you're not used to getting in a wreck. So you're driving down the road and it's kind of like rote memory, right? You're just driving, you're not really thinking about it because you're thinking about other things. All of a sudden, if someone hits the horn and like almost runs into you, you immediately, everything goes out the window because you have focus.
Right. So then you'd say that the focus, which was the most important part of the Milgram experiments, came from the fact that they were in an unfamiliar environment.
Yes. And here's what I would tell you that, because imagine that exact same scenario, but the guy came to your house to do it. It would never work because it's too familiar. It would never work. It's like, I know where I'm at. Everything's familiar. Who are you? You're some dude that came in my door.
Okay. So then it's like the fact that they are they have to pay attention to their surroundings because they don't know where they are, kind of soaks up all their brain activity.
Exactly. It focuses everything. Your emotions and your logic system is focused. It's like everything, boom. You keep, if you know, like I said, if you're driving down the road and all of a sudden somebody goes "Meow," and swerves toward you, you're not thinking about whether or not you go to the bathroom. You're not thinking about where you're going or what you're going to have to eat. You're thinking of survival because it's completely different. You're focused. Same principle, exact same principle.
Okay. Yeah. So you're gonna tell us how, who exactly, like government organizations, use these principles functionally?
Absolutely.
So yeah, who is it that's doing it, and what do they do? Yeah, give us some examples.
Okay. This used to be done with prisoners of war. This is where it all started.
Yeah.
So it was done with prisoners of war. If you've ever seen the old tapes from like the Korean War, where you would have a GI be like, swear out, you know, I hate America. I want to stay here. This is where the real freedom is and all that kind of stuff. Someone who's been brainwashed, but it's using the process that I'm going to show you. This has been used by the government. This has been used on prisoners of war. This has been used on high level people that are involved in espionage. You've probably heard of the term double agents before or something like that. This is the process that is used for that particular purpose.
Okay.
Number one is, like I always said before, you have to be seen as an authority, even whether it's fear because you've been abducted and you're in a position of authority, or whether you're a government agent and you've got a bad actor. If they don't see you as an authority figure, it doesn't work. And then number two, you have to take away their freedom of mobility. And this is what happens when people get kidnapped. And number three, you get extreme focus by inducing fear. And that fear can be some kind of a punishment, and it doesn't matter what it's for. It can be everything from waterboarding to, if you don't do this, we're going to not feed you for the next 3 days, or if you don't do this, we're going to do something to your family. It's all of that kind of thing. It's driving extreme amounts of adrenaline and fear. Because fear comes from, well, that doesn't come from, but fear lives in conjunction with adrenaline and cortisol in your body. And that's what causes that agitation and that horrible feeling of dread. And so you want to create that, because the more dread and the more concern, because they don't know what will happen, that you can create, the more they begin to break down. And the next step after that is you agitate. And what that means is you interrupt normal patterns. So this person who's ever been captured or kidnapped or something like that, what you do is, not only have you controlled where they can go, like you keep them isolated someplace, and not only are they scared to death, but now what you do is you start waking them up at different times during their normal sleep pattern. And you feed them at different times, or you make them do things that are not part of the normal routine. Anything to agitate, because the body wants and the brain wants function that is ritualistic. That's what the brain wants. It's like, I get up at this time, I go to bed at this time, I eat dinner when I get home, I work out in the morning, whatever. The brain wants consistency and ritual. So you take that away. So the next step after you do that is, if you really want this to go quickly, you restrict and control caloric intake. So in other words, you take somebody that's normally living on a 2,000 calorie a day diet, you put them on a 500 calorie a day diet. And because you're in authority and they have no freedom, you can do that. And what happens is, the more hungry you are, the more compliant you become, because everything starts firing incorrectly. Your thoughts are getting scrambled. And if your sleep has been interrupted and your routine is interrupted, you're literally breaking a human being down. And the last part is repetition, over and over. And you will break a person to the point that they will do anything that you ask them, and they will think it's their idea because their brain is broken. Another example of this would be what happened to Patty Hearst. I believe it was 1974. And she was abducted by the Symbionese Liberation Army. They held her for several weeks. They restricted her calories. They kept her in a closet. They put a bag over her head. And they only opened up the dark closet to give her very few scraps of food. So it's also restricting her calories. So she's in a new place, scared to death of the people because they're in authority over her. And her freedom is taken away because she's got a bag over her head. And when she doesn't have a bag over her head, she's kept in a dark closet, like a small closet. And her calories are restricted. And they're agitating by breaking in at all times and like screaming at her with the bag over her head and yelling things about the Symbionese Liberation Organization, which is the group that took her. And then what they began to do is, after this went on for several days, they started to feed her propaganda about how the Symbionese Liberation Army was actually the victim. And because she was broken, she was receptive to hearing those things, because like I told you earlier, if you push a human being, it doesn't matter what you grab, but you grab anything to save yourself. That's what happens here, because it doesn't matter whether it was Symbionese Liberation Organization or not. Wouldn't matter who it was, but they stopped being mean and instead fed her propaganda. So she's going to latch onto that, and she will believe anything she is told when she's completely broken. And within a matter of weeks, the result of this was she was allowed out of the closet, and she was further propagandized, and she was brought into the organization. And within a matter of weeks, there in 1974, there is footage of her. There's black and white footage of her robbing banks with them and yelling about the victims that are the Symbionese Liberation Organization and death to America. And she's holding a machine gun and robbing banks with this organization. That's what can happen.
That's like a really good illustration of how the whole thing works, about how people can take impulses and feelings that, especially when you do things like restrict people's calories and make them sleep in a closet or whatever, lowers their brain activity so that the impulses are not something that you can deal with. And then they provided her with a sense of meaning by saying, well, you can be on our side since we're the only people around you anyway. You can get rid of your fear by being with us. And then it gave her a whole new sense of meaning. It's a whole personality reconstruction that they did.
Correct. Yep. It's completely reformatting her personality.
Yeah.
It's like molding clay.
Yeah.
That's perfect. And that's, again, this is part of a process that's used all the time by governments. And it's used all the time by people that know how to do it to create kind of moldable people. So this is unfortunately something that actually happens even today. So what I would say to your audience about watching out to make sure this doesn't happen to you is look for some of the cues that we discussed with a couple of the people that we just talked about, some of the ways that they approach people. So if you see somebody coming to you and no matter what, they're trying to put themselves in a position of authority, even without your permission, and then on top of that, they start to pressure you in some way, you need to hit the brakes right then and assess what's going on here with this personality. Are they trying to talk me into something? Does it look as though they want me to make a decision? This is the big part you watch out for. Even whether we're talking about Andrew Tate or whether we're talking about Charles Manson, whether we're talking about any of these other things, you have to ask yourself, what do they want from me? What are they trying to get out of me? And you may not know right away, but if you have someone who has put themselves above you, and if you have someone who's pressuring you in any way, you need to hit the brakes and go, okay, I need to pay attention to this next part, because what are they trying to get out of me? Because if they want me to look up to them and they want me to respect them because they have money and they have a Bugatti or they have a house or they have this great big podcast or they have millions of dollars or they have all these friends as social proof, there must be something going on, because why are they talking to me? Because I don't know them, but apparently they want me to know them. So that's when you hit the brakes and go, okay, what's going on? And you pay attention. And you can see the signs if you're looking for them. The problem is people don't look for them, like the frog in the boiling water. It's just kind of warm and then it feels really good and pretty soon you're dead because you don't pay attention. And it's the same situation. So that's what I would really say to watch for, because if it can happen to other normal people, it can happen to you. And it does every single day. An example of this would be something that can be highly divisive. So depending on which side of the fence you're on, this could be offensive or it could be right up into what you believe was happening. But we saw similar things with the whole COVID thing. We saw similar processes put in place to control an entire population, because we had the concern about there's some sort of a flu. It may have come from a wet market of some sort, but people are becoming infected and we don't know how far this thing is going to go. And then what happened was it kept being replayed over and over on every station until it began to develop a groundswell of fear and a groundswell of uncertainty in people. We didn't know what to watch for. All of a sudden, anybody that had a sneeze, you're like, uh-oh, should we go get tested? And it went from that into, now we need you to do certain things. And we're going to start with this. We're going to take away your freedom, but it's for a good purpose. So let's do either 14 or 15 days to flatten the curve. And that was really hard for most people, but everyone got on board because, hey, it's the government. Why would they lie to me? And maybe this is the right thing to do. Okay, we'll all work from home and we won't go anywhere for a couple weeks. Well, 14 or 15 days to flatten the curve turned into like a year and a half. And you saw churches being shut down. You saw schools being shut down. You saw plexiglass screens go up everywhere. You saw people wearing masks everywhere. You saw people doing the 6-foot distancing. All these are rituals, and most have now been debunked as the fact that they just didn't work. They don't really do anything. It's more of a mind trick. It's like the cult leader. If you give your people something to do, a ritual to perform, they will feel more like they need to continue those things. So yes, I saw that there, and everyone did the 15 days of flatten the curve. Most people wore masks of some sort, or I couldn't get into the hospital to see friends unless I did. Some people went as far as to get the vaccine because that was pushed really hard. Other people were told, if you don't, you're going to lose your job. And then it became a control issue. And that control started to materialize by way of fear. Now it's fear. Now it's, if you don't do this, you may not get sick, but you could carry something and it could kill your grandmother. And so over a period of time, restrictions were put in place, freedoms were taken away, and we went along with it every step of the way.
Yeah, there's a lot of social pressure in there as well, which is something that that cults use. Also, they surround you with people, and they make you think that you need their approval.
Right. Or else there's something wrong with you, or you're a bad person, or you don't care about people. You don't care about others. So because you're so concerned with yourself that you won't do this thing to help everybody else. So there's, again, social pressure, and being social creatures, we are terrified of being out of the group, of being put out of the social structure.
Right. So then the whole point of us talking today is that my audience comes to me for me to help explain how the lower parts of the brain works so they can understand them. And you wanted to reach them and tell them how the government, basically, or other large organizations use this process, this brainwashing process, to turn impulses into meaning and identity and behaviors by, offering the connection in between them. Tell us about that. How does that work? And give us some examples of that. And, show people how to recognize this happening.
Sure. Okay, I can do that. First of all, a PSYOP is a psychological operation, or in the industry, sometimes it's called engineered reality, because you're creating a reality for other people. So the big picture is this. A PSYOP is done as a distraction. It's the old magician, look at this hand, but don't look at this hand. It's exactly the same thing. Let me tell you what to look for. Look for things that happen when other things that are extremely important are also happening, that it would hurt in some way the government that's overseeing you if you were to pay attention to it. So always watch the timing. A couple of things, like we had a Chinese weather balloon that flew all the way across, I believe it was in January 28th to February 4th, if I remember right, of 2023. It entered our airspace in Alaska, went all the way across the United States, and wasn't shot down until it got over the Atlantic Ocean. And this happened at the exact same time when we were still dealing with a global pandemic and the hanging on of the restrictions that were still in place and some of the things that hadn't been rolled back yet. And that happened at the same time. People were saying, why didn't they shoot it down? Why didn't they shoot it down? Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but when it was shot down, they brought it back for recon and things like that. What they found was that it was packed full of American technology. That's all that's been released as far as what was on board. They won't say what it is just yet. We will find out. But the fear was, number one, if we shoot it down over America, some farmer or somebody's going to come rushing over to look at it, like it's the Roswell incident again, and they're going to find what's in there, and that's going to be a problem. So that's one example. Another one would be, if you think about
when did that happen? What was it during?
That was January 28th to February 4th, 2023. It was at the very tail end of the biggest thing that was happening at that point. Wasn't that people were being, made to stay home. It was more of many governors were still using what were called emergency powers to extend restrictions and extend regulations and things like that. If you remember, many governors would re-up those powers for emergency purposes, and it was really not popular. And all of a sudden, this happens at the same time.
So the big scary weather balloon comes in to distract people from something that they don't like, so that they just let it happen.
Exactly. Don't pay. Look at this hand, but don't
Mhm.
look at this hand. Same thing.
Yeah.
We had the same thing recently. We had the New Jersey drones that were happening, and this is all declassified. What I'm going to share with you, but I knew about this quite a while ago. But when those first came out, they were ours. That's all we're supposed to say. They were ours,
Yeah.
and they were there for a purpose. I don't know that I could share really broadly what that purpose was, but they were looking for something. Now, so the first wave of that was us looking for something. And then what happened was people were jumping on the bandwagon going, I've got a drone. I want to be on TV. And they started popping up everywhere.
So then you're saying that these drones got deployed for a purpose that was not related to a PSYOP, and they just got used for that?
Yeah, this was actually, they were deployed sniffing. They were looking for something very important.
Yeah.
It happens to be that particular...
It happened at the right time?
That happened exactly at the right time. And then all of a sudden, it was something that now what we have is we have a nationwide panic. And it's not because of what we did at first. It was because everybody wanted their 5 minutes of fame. So people started putting up drones everywhere. They were everywhere. I can show you on my phone. I'm going back and forth behind my house. I was actually going to send this to you, but I didn't. But they were popping up everywhere. It's like, oh, there's UFOs everywhere. Right. That was very convenient because all they had to do was latch onto that and say, and if you notice, all the news organizations were saying the exact same things. That's another thing to look for. Whenever you see messaging that is uniform across platforms and networks, the government is involved. 100%. The government is involved. As an example, I would say this, and I've got to just be kind of careful about what I say, but I know for sure, based on what I do and based on my connections that I deal with all the time, I know about declassified documentation that explains how these things have happened. And all I can say is that if you want to use the term deep state, you can, but there are people that are part of that organization that funnel talking points to certain news organizations. I've seen the documentation. I know people that deal with this on a daily basis. And that's where much of the messaging does come from. And if you notice that type of thing with things, little taglines, little things like, this person is a threat to our democracy. Think about how many times you've heard that. Yeah. That is a talking point. Why is it that several different news organizations, and I mean a lot of them that sit on one side of the fence, say the exact same words? Yeah. There's a reason for that. And I can tell you that based on the context that I have and based on what I've read myself, I can tell you for sure that the situation that we just had with the New Jersey drones, not the first wave, but the subsequent waves, were used for this purpose and was harnessed to process a feeling and a fear in people that lasted for several weeks, while a whole lot of other things were happening behind the scenes that no one was supposed to know about or no one was supposed to pay attention to. Do you remember when I told you that PSYOPs are used by the government as a distraction? Yeah. And it's a distraction because they don't want you to see what's actually going on. Well, let's see what happened during the New Jersey drones. They began being seen mid-November. I believe it was the 18th of November, 2024. And this went big time December 1st. And then all of a sudden, for the next several weeks, we kept having sightings after sightings. So what happened between mid-November 2024 that may have culminated around December 1st, and then there was coverage of the drones to cover it up for a couple more weeks? Oh, yeah, that's right. President Biden pardons his son, Hunter. And look at the date it's reported on, December 2nd, 2024, which means it happened December 1st, which was when we began to see all the actual reportings in lots of different locations. Do you think it's a coincidence?
What the hell you say?
So then you're saying that you have read declassified documents that prove that the deep state, for want of a better term, since we can't talk about who it is, used the New Jersey drone story to distract people from what the government was doing at that time.
Correct. Everybody who's either a field agent or part of certain pieces of that organization has access to this information.
Yeah. So then what we're going to do now is we're going to go over what the PSYOP playbook, what you would expect to see if the government was going to use this manipulation process in information that you see in order to make you think something, believe something, identify in some way, or to just distract you while they do something else. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
All right, let's hear it.
I'll give you the exact steps. If the government was going to pull off what we would call a world-changing manufactured event, there is a playbook for that. And the first part of that, before you get to the actual steps, is you have to move what this is called. This is called the Overton window. I don't know if you're aware of what that is or not.
Yes, I do know the Overton window. Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know the Overton window, it is the set of all information that it's acceptable to talk about. So if you have over here, you might have like Holocaust denial, and then over here you might have like bring back the Soviet Union or something, the cross and the hammer. And inside of the Overton window is what it's like socially acceptable to talk about. And when you go outside of it, then people go, uh-oh, you're getting a little crazy. So they know how to move the Overton window or expand it or shrink it.
Exactly. So the first part of the process is the Overton window has to be moved to where what's about to happen becomes acceptable to talk about, acceptable to think about, and acceptable to sort of process. So exactly what you said is 100% perfect. Now, once this happens, and I have to tell you, this is straight out of the playbook. So anyone who's ever been involved in the DOD, the CIA, the FBI, or any of the other alphabet organizations, we all know this. So this is not new information to anyone who teaches this or who lives in this world. But this is a way that you go. Once you move the Overton window to what is acceptable to talk about and to do, then number one is you have what's called a normalization phase. And in the normalization phase, what that means is you've moved that Overton window to where everything that you were about to make normal becomes acceptable to talk about. And then what happens is during the normalization phase is that you have news organizations talk about the subject. You try to get talk shows that you can have any type of influence over to talk about the subject, whatever that is, whatever the PSYOP is that is being formulated. So the number one thing after you move the Overton window is called the normalization phase. Yeah. Now, let's pretend for a minute, let's go back to the drones, because we'll just put, and this is, I'm not saying that this happened that way, but let's use that for an example. Let's say that it was going to get bigger. Let's say that the drones turned into something that was even bigger than it was. This is the steps they would use. They would be putting up footage of drone activity all the time, every news channel, every streaming service. They would be putting up this activity. Look at it. They're flying through the sky. And what that does is it normalizes to the rest of America that this is common. This is happening all the time. That's called the normalization phase. People get desensitized to it. Once you're desensitized, you're willing to accept even more. Now, next part after you normalize it is you begin to set the stage, and another person that teaches this type of stuff calls it the big reveal. So if you're setting the stage for the big reveal, what that means is that you have an underground sort of percolating of people that pop up here and there saying, hey, we know more than everyone is talking about, and pretty soon we're going to find out because they're going to release all the documentation. They're going to share things.
So that's setting the stage?
That's called setting the stage for the big reveal. So in other words, reveal something. Because if you want to control somebody, you've got to give them something to fear. So that's the setting.
So you're getting people to feel anticipation. You're making them pay attention.
Yes.
Okay.
So you've normalized it. So anything that you do with it, they're accepting because it's normal. So now you ramp it up. You get the anticipation. You start to use the words and lay the groundwork for the fact that you're about to reveal something. You're going to reveal something, whether it's information, whether it's footage, whatever. So once you set that stage by causing the anticipation, the next part is that you begin to take that piece and drive it into not only anticipation, but you begin to say, we're not sure if there's something to fear here. So you start stirring up the idea of fear. And what that does is that invokes the need of some sort of salvation, some sort of rescuing, a savior of some sort. But people will feel like they need to be rescued. It's like you need a rescuer. because we're anticipating something big is going to be shown to us. And we're kind of afraid of what this might be. So we need someone to step in and help. We need someone to come in and rescue us. So you have to see that there's going to be a need. You express a need for someone to rescue them, rescue the general public. Now,
So they use the news media to create fear and to also make people feel like someone needs to do something about it.
yes. And the someone always ends up being a government organization. It's never a person. It's never like, oh, we need the smartest person on earth to come up with a plan, or we need this group of people at this think tank to come up with an idea for us. It's not that. It's always, we need the government to step in and fix it, like welfare or some type of entitlement. I mean, I'm not saying those things, but the government steps in to take care of those things. And that's what they want you to think, is the government needs to step up to rescue us in some way, whatever that looks like, because we don't know yet what it looks like. Right. Now, once that happens, the next thing that you will see is called an escalation of reports. And what that means is you will see reports of events happening, more of them happening, more sightings, more things, more people on the news that come across. And it's no longer the news reporters talking. It's the man on the street or the woman on the street. And they got the video camera there and they're like, what did you see? And they'll share, well, I saw this and then this happened. And they'll start sharing personal experiences.
So that makes people feel like people like me are seeing this. So they begin to identify with the experience.
Thank you. It's where I was going. It takes it out of the hands of only the people in the dresses and the suits on the TV, and it puts it into the regular person's paradigm. It puts it into your world. It's no longer just TV stuff. It's you, it's me, it's our neighbors, it's our mom, it's our dad, so on and so forth. So that's what you do. You have escalating reports of events, and then you start to have people talking about it. You have to start to talk about sightings. It's not confirmed that it's a real sighting of what you think it is. It's just a sighting that might be that. So the more that you can escalate that the every man or the every woman is now experiencing it, it could come to you. It could come home to you. And that starts to make a problem for you. Now, once that happens, and this is where it gets, you want to talk about deep state, this is where this comes in. And this is straight out of the playbook. This is where you have what's called an organized media blitz. Organized media blitz means that every station that will jump on the bandwagon to get behind whatever this is, whatever the PSYOP is, they begin to blitz. In other words, it's always on. And if you looked at the drones, it was exciting for about a month because everyone was talking about it. You had like hillbillies, yuckity yuck talking about it. You had people, soccer moms, oh, I was so afraid. You had athletes saying, yeah, we came out of this and we saw that. Everyone was talking about it. But now what you have is you have an organized media blitz. Organized because someone that has power and someone who has authority and money is organizing all of the media that will be a part of it to be a part of it. And then they'll start constant coverage, and you'll see coverage all the time. And what's interesting about this part is this is where the identical phrases come out. Like you'll hear things like, this is a threat to democracy, or this is the possible end of our freedom.
The repetition.
Yeah, the repetition of that sort of thing. Now after the media blitz, there's usually a lull. And then after that, then will come what's called, it's a government engineered, what we call a global event. You'll hear things like this. We had an entire electronic grid go down. Yeah. Is it related? Or you'll have every flight at this airport was interrupted for some unknown reason. There's a glitch in the electronics and it's happening everywhere. So it's things like that. So
then is this something that the government makes happen, but they don't let you know?
This is at times, let me put it this way. This is sometimes the government will make things happen, or they will say that they've happened, and they'll be real nebulous about where it's happened. Like sometimes they'll give you an exact thing because they've been able to engineer something. Like, here's where it happened, here's the time it happened, and here's who was affected. And then if not, then they'll say, we're getting reports of control towers losing this, or this is happening, or this glitch is happening. And
so they make it up?
They can make it up. Look at the Gulf of Tonkin.
Sure.
Look at all those things. Can they make it up? That yeah, they can. They have. I don't mean to bring up the Gulf of Tonkin, but if you look look back at things related to the Bay of Pigs and related to the escalation of the Vietnam War and all that stuff.
Yeah, they just say something to make it seem like it's like now is the time. Here's the big thing.
They literally made up that our ships were being bombed by the enemy, and they weren't being bombed.
Yeah.
So yeah, can they make it up? They have.
Yeah.
Sure they can. Now,
All right.
would they? I'm not supposed to say they would, but can they? Sure they can. They have the capability to do it. But
Well, they have.
well, yeah, they have. So it depends on how far you want to take it.
Yeah.
After this sort of organized event, whatever it is, whether it's you, and this could be even something like seeing holograms in the sky, because that's easy to do now with AI. So if you have a power grid go down in Atlanta and you have 4 of the biggest towers that are in all the airports have a glitch, and all of a sudden you see a projection of some sort of a hologram or an AI, you know what I'm saying? It's getting deep here. I'm not trying to be tinfoil hat, but this is all part of what can happen.
Yeah.
So this will cause what's called major chaos, because everything will be in disarray, and it's for a purpose. Now we're going to get into the purpose. So the last one is that after all this chaos happens, what you'll notice is all of a sudden there will be a solution that is offered.
Mm-hmm.
This is how we're going to get through this event. See if this sounds familiar. We've found a way to keep everybody safe. This is how we're going to get this through this pandemic. This is how we're going to get through this scare. This is how we're going to get through this sighting. This is how we're going to get through this contact. This is how we're going to get through this whatever, insert whatever it is here. But after all the chaos happens, then comes the reason for everything. And the reason is, after the chaos, the government will bring a solution. Now, what we have to watch for is this. We'll see coordinating initiatives for spending that didn't exist before. You'll see escalated surveillance of people to keep them safe. We had that with the Patriot Act. Everyone bought into that. That's an example for you. Think about the Patriot Act after 9/11. Everyone, I don't care if you listen to my phone calls. I don't care if you look at my emails. Keep us safe. I don't care if I have to take off my shoes at the TSA. You want my belt? Here you go. And it's like we walked right into that. And that was supposed to be temporary. Here we are, 20 some years later. So what we'll see is we will see sort of more and more surveillance to mitigate the possibility of the threat coming back. And this finds its way into our lives by way of what we saw in Minnesota when Governor Walz was saying, report your neighbor.
Yeah.
Here's a hotline. Call and report your neighbor. That actually happened.
Yeah.
That's
so it's always something that the government wanted anyway. They were.
This is why they engineered it in the first place.
Yeah, it's on their agenda, and so they make it seem like something is happening spontaneously, but really they're guiding you the whole way through, just like people who get guided into cults. Exactly.
And then here are the 3 last pieces of it, because we had the 7 steps.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the why. Here's the reason. You ready? Number 1, it will cause, number 1, unquestioned dependency on a government and its leaders. Think about the pandemic. Think about the SARS thing that happened many, many years ago. Think about 9/11 and the Patriot Act. Those are some of the recent things. So number 1 is you'll have unquestioned trust and or dependency on government and government leaders. That's number 1. That's one of the objectives of the government to engineer one of these. So if it can't be trust, then it has to be dependency, because some people will never trust the government.
Yeah.
So they want your trust, but they know they can't get it. So some will trust. And then other than that, they want you to be dependent on them.
Yeah.
Number two reason, they want the public to willingly give up freedoms, plural, not freedom, freedoms, plural. Number 3 is expanded government control and stricter regulations that benefit the government but don't benefit the people in general. So I gave you the 3 things that were the objectives. And it all comes down to the unmitigated dependence or trust on the leaders, giving up freedoms, and then the other thing is being okay with restrictions that may be temporary, but actually are never temporary.
Right.
So here's the question that you ask. Here's how we can wrap it up. Here's a question that you ask yourself. is this in any way giving the government more control? Or two, is this in any way taking away, temporary or otherwise, any of my freedoms?
Right. So more power for them or less power for you.
Exactly. What the big objective through all of those 7 steps that are engineered is more control in fewer hands.
Yeah. So if you're seeing something on the news and you don't know if it's real or not, the best way to try to kind of figure that out is, can this be leveraged to make people afraid
Yep.
and make them trust the government for a solution, and then that solution happens to be giving up your power?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And willingly.
And that happens a lot.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. So I guess there you have it.
And the uncanny thing, you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
Your kicker. The uncanny thing is everything that they do during those steps that affect your emotion center
Mm-hmm.
is exactly what happens when you find yourself drawn to somebody, attached to somebody.
Yeah, the same set of emotions.
Same emotion.
Yeah.
If you're attracted to somebody and you feel that little pitter patter, or you have to be with them or whatever, it's that it's pushing the same buttons. So the buttons of attraction are the same buttons that are pushed for fear and dependence, not independence, fear and dependence.
Yeah.
Depending on the government, depending on someone else to nanny state you. It's
Yeah.
exact same process.
So they kind of did what it is that I do, and they broke down how to make people's bodies release the chemicals that cause attachment to and reliance on the government in the same way that you'd get attached to a person.
100% accurate.
Yep. So there you have it. That's the world you live in.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on when you watch the news most of the time, and TikTok and so on and so forth. So hopefully, I mean, that was great. So that's a lot of good information in there, and hopefully my audience will pick this up and spread it to the corners of the internet, and people will figure out how not to listen to this anymore.
Be careful.
Yeah.
Question everything. How about that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Question everything. Question everything that comes from the government or could possibly be controlled by the government, since
Yep.
we now know that they tell the news what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been great.
You bet.
I think that's good. I think that's good to wrap up.